Call the workshop to order. This is the second of three scheduled workshops in the development of the FY 27-2018 budget. County Administrator is tied up in Tallahassee, so who's taking over?
That'd be me.
Brandy will be leading the workshop. Thank you.
All right. The budget that we have right now, we anticipate that we'll be using the rollback rate for ad valorem. We're basing that on the preliminary estimate that was received from the property appraiser June 1st. There will be a final certification and there may be an adjustment based on his actual certification, but right now the rollback rate is 7.8677 mils.
Say it again.
7.8677.
Question.
Go ahead.
Going to the rollback rate, how can we absorb any cost increases, like your next slide?
Because of the $350,000 that we're trying to burn off in the excess fund balance.
So you're burning the fund down.
Yes. We tried in 15-16. We were burned about a little over $100,000, so we're not very good at burning through this money.
What happens when the burn, there they are. What happens when the burn is done? We got to bump the millage rate back up?
Well, that really all depends what the situation is at the time.
How much money are you trying to burn this time?
$350,000 is our goal until we get down to where the fund balance should be.
But that represents a half a mil.
A little less than a half a mil for 350.
Wow. Decrease. So that's good for the public, just so you know. That's.
Do we take into consideration the drop off of paying for the courthouse, that note being paid in full?
Capital has nothing to do with general fund dollars.
1 cent sales tax, right?
All right, so you good? Currently in the general fund, we assume to give a 2% cost of living allocation to employees. Constitutional officers also requested that as well. And right now, the estimate on the increase in the capital health plan rates is 8%. We're going to have a little adjustment there. The first information that Debbie got from our agent was 9.2, and so they're still negotiating that rate. So I think we're going to come in a little closer to 8.5 when it's all said and done, but right now we're using the 8%. Constitutional officers, as they return money to the board each year, they are eligible to bring that cash forward to supplement any difference between what they've requested and the 2% increase that's being provided from the board.
And then that's one time only, Brandy, right? If they're using reserves, obviously if they want a 3% or 4% pay increase, for example, that's not sustainable in a long-term period using reserve. Are y'all taking that into account, that they can't use that for recurring expenses?
They hopefully the goal is to use that for capital purchases.
Okay. Not reoccurring expenses.
And then there's our reduction of $350,000 that we're shooting for. I wanted to highlight this because you've had a entity reach out to you for some support, and that was the Florida Veterans Association. They've requested a contribution of $10,000. I thought they were going to have a representative here to speak to you, but it sounds to me like they're requesting that recurring contribution, so I wanted to highlight the different organizations that you're already contributing to. The We Care Network, the Senior Center. Last year there was an agreement to give them an additional $20,000, but for the current fiscal year only. So the 17-18 budget assumes that we're going to drop that $20,000 back out as discussed last year. The American Red Cross, we're funding $5,000 annual, and that's relatively new as well. I think 16-17 is the first year for that. And then I forwarded that email from the Florida Veterans Association also to everybody, and we discussed it today, requesting that contribution for the $10,000. We have not included that $10,000 in the budget at this point. That's going to require some direction from y'all in order to do that.
You know, if we're going to consider that, I got a call from Florida Wild Mammal Association requesting a donation. We're going to get about 50 more requests for donations. I can tell you that right now.
We kind of talked about this today. It does snowball. Once you contribute to one, then, you know.
I'm not inclined to want to do it. I mean, I'm a veteran myself, and no offense against veterans. I don't know these guys from Adam, so, I'd just say nix it right now. It's up to me.
I agree.
That's 3 that agree. That's all we need.
I got a 4, and I think I just got a 5. Thank you for that. One of the things in the general fund that we have kind of an issue is that everybody knows that the 21st Century Program is going away. So we have budgeted to reduce some of the personnel that is currently in charge of maintaining and cleaning and helping with the operations of that facility to offset the loss of that revenue from the 21st Century Program. And just to point out here that we have agreed to be the fiscal agent for WCCY for the Ounce of Prevention Program. It's in its final year, so the end date is June 30th, which basically we're going to act as their bank. It's going to be an agency fund. Greg may want to elaborate a little bit more on that if you have any questions. Questions? Okay.
I was reading there's a reimbursement grant. They'll fund some things, we'll reimburse them. They'll ask us to invoice things and invoice us directly. We'll fund those in advance, and they get reimbursement from the house.
How much is the grant, Greg? How much is the grant?
300, I think, is something like that. It may be a little less this final year, because as Pam Pinkerton tried to describe to me, the purpose of the grant is to sort of wean the program off of grant funds and to be self-funding. That's obviously not going to happen, and so they're not going to pour a lot of cash into it this year. It'll not a lot.
What is our capital medical, the 8%? What does that total come to?
The
Dollars?
CHP increase to
Yes.
8%, I can get that for you in a minute.
The dollar amount of the increase or the total bill for CHP?
What's the total bill?
I don't have,
Now, that ounce grant, when I talked to them a couple of years ago, that's a
yeah. I'm looking
starter
at it.
grant. I don't know what the best word is.
So we can get it one more
The,
year.
the ounce grant was more of a Kickstarter grant to try to get the county to form its own program,
Yes.
but that's not going to happen.
Get that program self-sufficient, which is not going to happen.
Seed, that's what it was, a seed money.
And so obviously, if it's not going to continue, and this is the last year, they're not going to pour a lot of money into it.
In the general fund, it's about $8,000 or $800,000 a year.
Am I to understand that if a destitute person moves into the county and they have a high medical bill, that the county picks that up?
If they're covered under the Medicare or Medicaid program, or it depends, there's some specific, we pay a county lump sum share each month to the Medicaid program paid to the state, and then we also have HICRA, which is hospital care, something reimbursement, and we are obligated to pay for that as well.
But that's not part of that 8 million, that's
No.
separate.
No,
But I think with Obamacare, when it came in, or the whatever, Affordable Care Act, whatever you want to call it, one of those was that the county jurisdiction is responsible for hospital bills. I know one came in Gainesville, I
It's
think.
always been that way.
It's always been
Been
that
that
way.
way.
It has nothing to do with Obamacare, it's always been that way.
No, it's a state law, that's how they've chosen to distribute their Medicaid funds.
Do you, I know you probably don't know this, but if somebody's ill and they can't pay, do we pick up 25% of their cost to Tallahassee, 50%?
It's not a percentage. They go through the health department, they apply, they get awarded, they go to the hospital, they come back, the bills come through the health department, ultimately to us, and there's a daily per diem rate, whether it's in hospital or out of hospital. And I don't have those rates off the top of my head, but it is fractions of the total bill.
So basically, if someone had a $100,000 bill, the county couldn't.
I've never seen one that big
Uh,
in 17 years.
50,000.
50,000, yeah, I've seen those. And we might pay 15%, 20% of them a dollar on.
What about the increase on the Medicaid cost share? Is that going up this year?
Go up, and it will continue to go up. Do you have the letter?
I do.
Every year that they've forewarned us what those rates are doing.
We tried to fight that in the legislature because we used to pay it based on utilization. And I think our citizens that are eligible to the program had pretty good utilization. And now you pay it, every county, just based on enrollment. So depending on whether they're utilizing or not, we're paying based on the number of people we have enrolled in the system, which I think we were going up 7% a year or something like that.
We get a letter each June from the DOR telling us what our county share for the state fiscal year is going to be, and for the state fiscal year 17-18 is $309,000, so a little less than $26,000 a month. Now we add a little extra on because the last quarter for us for fiscal year 17-18 will be a new state fiscal year. We don't necessarily know what that county share is, so we have a little cushion there because we know it's going to go up. We just don't know how much.
Okay.
So
So the 300 is the last year's numbers.
No,
then?
that's this
That'll
coming
be
year,
17-18
Okay.
state
but it
fiscal
starts
year.
July,
Yes,
which
July 1.
is really part of our 16-17 year.
So what percentage increase is that from prior year?
Let's see, budgeted. It's actually a 2.04% decrease because we budgeted a little bigger cushion in 16-17 for that final quarter that we didn't know what it was going to be, then we needed to, so we've backed that down a little bit. So we're budgeting $329,000 for what we know is going to be a $309,000 obligation for 3 quarters, and then that last quarter is unknown.
So it's a decrease based on our budget, but what's the percentage increase or decrease based on actual cost from the?
I can tell you we finalized 15-16 about $285,000, so roughly probably around $300,000 in the current year when we get that final quarter, but midway through the year we won't have a full year.
Okay.
I'm looking at the senior center and I'm a little confused. We've taken away the 20,000 that we gave them last year, but it says equal to the level of funding provided in 15-16. So we're still doing funding. We're
Correct.
just not doing a 20 bonus.
That's
We
correct.
had a one-time increase, and we're reverting back to the prior amounts. Yes.
Okay.
Is there any inclination they're going to come ask for that again? Anybody approach you or anything?
I have not been approached, and as far as I'm aware, nobody has approached the county administrator requesting that. I think it was pretty clear last year that the board felt like it would just be a one-time thing, so.
With Mr. R.H. Carter, their finances are 200-300% better than they were when they came after the 20. So they will not be requesting that, I'm sure.
That was the whole point of it, is to get them back on their feet. Yeah.
One thing I want to note about the WCCY before we move on is that also we're only going to be the fiscal agent for 9 months, that grant, because it's on the state fiscal year also. So from September 1st through June 30th, so just 3 quarters.
Well, it'll be 1 quarter of this year.
1 quarter of this year and 3 quarters of next year. I need to work on that. Okay, our building fund, same thing here. We're anticipating a 2% COLA for employees to absorb the increase in CHP rates. We're also planning to put on an additional inspector. Our current building official is scheduled to retire, and so we're going to need to add an additional inspector on to get in place for a succession plan. And then they have one part-time 30-hour-a-week part-time person who's going to be moving to a full-time building tech and helping out with, from what I understand, maybe plans reviewing. Kirsten, you know? Okay.
Is that the girl?
Yes, she's a younger girl over there.
One that writes the sayings?
I don't know about that.
Yes, that's right. Now, you said the 2% COLA, right, to help absorb increase in health costs, but are we absorbing the CHP increase?
2% COLA and anticipate absorbing the CHP increase.
Okay, I thought you said to offset their costs, but it's actually both.
Just like the general fund.
Right.
Are we neutral yet in our building fund?
No. And actually, based on where we are in the current year, they're going to make about $180,000 more than what we budgeted in revenue. So they're still adding to their fund balance.
How much above fund balance do they have that they,
They started the year with a $500,000 surplus. And like I said, I think they're going to put a considerable amount to that again. So we're probably going to end $700,000 surplus, if not more.
Now, can that be used to purchase that truck?
Those funds will be used to purchase the truck, yes.
So we can use, just,
but that's
Only for the building department use.
I understand.
Okay.
700,000 is an expensive truck.
Well, another option we could do, we all talked about this before, we could reduce building permit fees.
Yes.
Now, we are getting rid of,
We already did, didn't we?
We did
we already did,
once.
yes. We got rid of the
I
DPA
think we need to go a little
requirement.
deeper.
This doesn't tie to the DPAs, all right, Summer? This is totally different.
Totally different issue, and you haven't quite got rid of the DPA.
Why, I
We
want
got
to,
rid of
Next month.
AC chain, well, we're coming. So we could reduce building permit fees to burn down that reserve too. Now, what's their target number based on, and what should it be on a healthy reserve?
Last year's expenses were what, I've got 798. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
426.
yeah,
426.
they need to have roughly $125,000 to $150,000 in fund balance.
And
So
they
we
got
could really-
I
700,000.
got 700.
We could drastically reduce permit fees for
We
a
need
couple of years.
big
You
cut.
could,
And here's the problem, is you reduce the building permit fees to begin with.
Right.
But growth has offset that decrease, and we've gained some. So you just don't know what the
It's a good problem.
I may look at,
problem.
Well, we could focus the cut, though, on commercial, if we wanted to, because those are much higher fees than a residential construction. And if we wanted to maybe encourage, I don't know if we could do it in a certain district, like you say in the Crawfordville town area, you pay half building permit fees that you would somewhere else. I don't know if you can do that. I'm just saying, we could target it to commercial, right, only, right, Heather?
however, within the confines of the law, you want to construct that reduction.
Is what I said even close to accurate, Heather?
I mean, I need to do a little research on building permit fees, because there's a statute, I need to read through the statute
Okay.
and see what it says.
But just
Targeting in town plan would be
just a suggestion.
just a real plus, because it would really encourage
Incentivize,
development in the town plan.
You could say if you build inside the Crawfordville town area, you're pay 1/3 of the building permit fees. That's not gonna make somebody change their mind, but we need to burn it off, right?
Yeah, that would encourage.
And we could use it to target growth where we think it should go.
Right.
I like across the board. Let's just make an across the board cut. Most of the growth is in the town plan area, so they're gonna receive the benefit of that.
Good problem to have,
Good problem.
instead of having too little money.
I was looking at the sheriff's fund. He's probably surplus with ice patients right now.
Yes,
We're going to get there soon.
Yeah, well,
So basically, that fund is ahead of the curve now instead of being below the curve.
they,
In
based
one
on,
sense, yeah.
yeah, based on their
somebody turn
current
Jerry's computer off.
projection, they are scheduled to put a substantial amount directly to fund balance in the current year.
How much reserve, how many months of reserve do they normally carry in a good year?
When are y'all gonna get to the sheriff's slide? Can we wait, please,
Okay.
Just a
Jerry?
minute. Shortly.
How about here?
We'll
Yes.
get there in just a
Put your
second.
computer screen down like this, so you're not looking at the slides.
BP Restore Act Fund is another thing we have some moving around going on. We anticipate to add one administrative position. This will be somebody who assists Cherie in going after projects and managing projects, as well as one engineer that is going to be functioning with, some of these projects have to come in a certain amount of design and plan stage, so this engineer would support that, as well as some of our regular county road projects and wastewater projects. So this person wouldn't be 100% dedicated to the Restore Act Fund. They'd kind of be split between some of our other special revenue funds and enterprise funds to do what needed to be done on behalf of the county. And then anything that's not supported by the Restore Act money, because we can claim some direct costs and indirect costs, and there's, things that may not be funded by a BP, they will be supported either by a general fund contribution or, if it's appropriate, from another special revenue fund to support those operations. That is going to be a very fluid process moving along. As you all know, there's still a lot of things in play right now, and so we'll just keep you updated as things change and we hit different benchmarks with that. Very exciting. Very exciting.
Are you looking at hiring a PE or just like an engineer?
That is going to be a question for David. I'm not really sure.
Don't hire a lawyer.
All right, now we're to the sheriff's fund. Basically, like we're just talking about, our current projection is that they're going to bring over $3 million in the current year in the housing for prisoner revenue. We budgeted 1.8, so roughly 1.3 is going to go directly to the fund balance, and so this helps us out considerably. One of the things that we've done this year is we wanted to identify the true cost of the program so that we knew what our exposure was if it should go away. And based on information provided by Jan and Jared, the program costs $1,358,000 a year to run. So what we were considering was about a $700,000 hole. The difference between our 1.1 and our 1.8 is really a $450,000 hole. So we're gathering a lot of information now that we really couldn't get before, and so the picture looks better than it did.
So if ICE went away, we would only be on the hook for 400 and something thousand.
Somebody we have to cut $441,000.
And so basically that's what's supplementing our local law enforcement right now. We're using that $450,000 to supplement it.
They're subsidizing the millage rate by 0.441 mils, basically.
Roughly.
That's what it's always been. It's ICE prisoner revenue subsidizes the millage rate. So citizens don't have to pay it with property taxes. They're paying it, and I've always said that. If it gets down to where it's not really making any money, fine. But at this point, I think Jared is, and I've said many times he was lucky, but he's corrected me. It's not just luck. He's reestablished relationships with ICE. Now it's making good money, and that's really gotten this county out of a jam. Well, and the sheriff's probably out of a jam for the reserve.
A potential jam in a
yes.
real sort of thing.
There's a couple moving parts to this. One is just sheer fund balance, and we ended the year 15-16 with a little over $400,000 in fund balance, which is in the sheriff's fund, which is completely insufficient. You need about $2.5 million, a little more than that. So you'll drop $1.3 million to that. You do that another year, and you're going to be real close to where you need to be in fund balance.
We'll have 1.3 plus the 400 they had, right?
Plus hopefully another 1.3, crossing our fingers if it happens again. If this rate
this year,
stays.
I'm saying this year will be 1.3 plus 4, so 1.7.
Yes.
So one more good year, Jan.
Fund balance policy, though, we did something special with the sheriff's fund. We said not only do you need 25% of your expenses, but we really ought to have 25% plus 2 years of our exposure.
Right.
So that
another 800.
You add another 800,000 on top, so that if it goes away, it gives you 2 years to figure out what you're going to do.
Yeah, I think that's a
so
good
you can burn fund balance down 2 years in a row by that number, and have some time to figure out how you're going to.
And just for grins and giggles, let's say 2 years from now, all that happens. They meet fund balance. They've met the separate fund balance for the other thing. So I want to be sure we don't get back to using that money for reoccurring expenses.
Like I said, it's a positive, and the only thing that we have not figured out yet, and we've already met with the sheriff's office, how do you get out from underneath this completely? Because that is a 1.3 million or $1.4 million problem. So if you wanted to use the 1.8 million that we're budgeting for capital only, you've got to come up with $1.4 million in recurring revenue.
Exactly how you do it.
So
I'm not saying we're going to do this, but keep the millage rate the way it is, and not go to the rollback rate, take that extra revenue until you whittle that 441 down to like $20,000. That's how you would do it. Now, we're not going to do that. I know nobody's going to say that, but that's how you would do it, right?
We're trying to get baby steps here. We're just trying to get back our footing, get to where we can breathe a little bit. And then the final problem is, how do we get out from underneath the revenue in a complete sense of not relying on it for operations?
This is kind of on track, but if we kept the same millage rate and not went to rollback, if we kept 8.5 mils,
You'd be out in 1 year.
how much more revenue would that generate if we kept the millage rate at 8.5?
Roughly exactly what you.
1 year we could be,
exposure.
so in 1 year we could have zero exposure, basically, right?
Well, no, you're talking about 441,000. What I'm suggesting to you is our exposure is the difference between 1.8 in revenue and 1.4 in cost. You've got to come up with 1.4 in revenue to get out from underneath it completely.
Now, I thought,
That's 3 years' worth.
maybe I'm misunderstanding, but ICE program cost is 1.3. If we lose ICE, they can cut $900,000 of expense, right?
That's correct.
To me, that's good enough. If you can get $440,000, where if we lose ICE tomorrow, they don't have to cut, they only got to cut what they need to cut to go back to,
Or get additional revenue from somewhere else, which is your 445 or so.
that, I would be happy with that. And I'm sure they would too, that they could just say, all right, guys, we lost ICE. We don't need all these prisoner guards anymore. We don't need this medical anymore. That's a big expense, is the private medical stuff. We don't have to meet that standard. We're done. Theoretically, we could be out like that in 1 year, right? If we left the military at 8.5.
Correct.
One of the things that counties and government has to be careful about doing in good times, creating additional expenses. Several years ago, the U.S. was plus in money, and all of a sudden, everybody in the world was pulling out new programs. So in good times, we've got to be really tough on establishing new programs. And
I've always said surplus years are the hardest years to budget because you don't want to expand too far.
It's very difficult to give somebody something in good times, and I've never seen anybody yet who in hard times say, you know, I'd really like to give you
And
back
that's
what
the
you gave
mistake
me.
we made a dozen years ago
Yes.
when we were fat with cash.
Or
and everything.
we could try to do it over 2 or 3 years. Let's say millage rate's 8.5 right now. We'll cut it back to 8.25. And whatever extra, we'll put towards that hole. Next year, keep cutting the millage rate, but not go to the rollback rate. That's just a suggestion, but that would fix the problem, right?
If ICE,
Right,
if ICE continues the way they're
Right.
doing, it'll solve itself.
Yeah, but we're trying to,
Get off.
I understand what you're saying. We're trying to wean ourselves off of the reliance on that. And I think David Harvey did a great job setting it up. We have really subsidized property taxes with this money.
Yeah.
And we, probably shouldn't have done that, but that's fine. It worked out okay. But if it goes away, we need to be prepared.
The great thing here is that we've gone from being about, what, you say 800 to $1 million in exposure to half that. So it is a much more manageable.
Yeah, I don't think in the near future we're going to have any problem with losing it.
You never know. Government might say, we no longer want prisoners where mosquitoes are in North Florida. Whatever reason they come up with. I don't know, whatever it is. Say, all right, we're going to move everybody to Virginia or whatever. Just never know. That's
They
how
have
government...
also
They
investigated building their own.
got a house prisoners.
Yeah, they say they build their own building and say, all right, counties, we don't want to pay you anymore. We finally wised up in Congress and we want to save money by not doing, paying for everything. We're going to do it ourselves. So just something to think about. Maybe if we did it over 2 years or 3 years, we could wean ourselves off of that, right? Jan, you with me? Look at Jan nodding. We talked about doing this for years, right? Yeah, I know Mary Dean was a big fan of it. Something to think about.
At least we've got money coming in that
Yeah.
allows us to make it easier in the transition.
Okay, continuing on with the sheriff's fund, this budget request should fund a 2% COLA for their employees, also absorb the increase in the capital health plan rates. Jared's not able to be here today, but in trying to find out what direction he was going, he's done some salary realignments based on the employees' service years and job performance. So they're weighting both of those factors in determining where they should be in the salary range. He's also asked for, and this is actually funded from their employees that left, that excess fund was redistributed. So this is not part of an increase for them. They just redistributed the funds they had. It includes a $1,000 increase for full-time certified officers and telecommunicators, lieutenants and below. So they are addressing the worker bees basically, and this is not going to the top people. And right now we're biting off this part, and this does not address the starting pay. And so I think maybe next year he's going to work into a step plan, still working on that. But this addressed the biggest, highest priority issues that he had.
Once they recover the reserves issue with the ICE money and everything, theoretically they could use excess ICE revenue for like a signing bonus, for example. Maybe even if they didn't increase base pay, is that a legitimate use for that?
As long as it's legal and it's not recurring, there wouldn't be an issue with that.
Just something they could think about. They do it for nursing and teaching and everything else.
Y'all have anything else on the share fund?
Just, I think the entire county was watching live PD this weekend. Seeing,
Were we on live PD?
fortunately, we have a very boring county. At least Saturday night we did. Friday. I can't remember.
Very nice people.
Yeah, it was good.
Hearing it all around.
Yeah.
All right, in the road fund, we anticipate a 2% increase for ESG's contract amount for the fund that or the portion that is funded from the road department. We have capital equipment purchases budgeted. There's some, I can tell you specifically what that is if you want to know how many tractors and trucks and things like that. And then we also we're budgeting cash forward and reserve funds for contingency in case something comes up during the year we didn't anticipate. And then we also have the capital grader lease in there as well. So the road fund is in good shape.
How has gas tax revenue been doing? I know statewide it's been decreasing because people go buy these fuel-efficient cars and they don't need that much gas anymore. Unfortunately, we still have to maintain the roads, but that's, I mean, a lot of counties are, the state really is having a big issue with that. But ours has pretty much been level.
Even in a growth situation, it's a very flat tax to begin with. There's 10 pennies on every dollar that we collect, roughly.
But we're allocated by population, or we're allocated what we actually collect?
It's a complicated formula, and population is a part of it. Sales is a part of it, which we can't get that information. They won't release that.
Of the 10 pennies, how many do we get back?
Well,
They don't know.
no, just the county says 10 pennies.
Yeah.
We get 10 pennies. But think about it. You sell an additional 1 million gallons next year. What's 10 pennies on that? It's 100,000. So, I mean, it's nothing.
Yeah.
Your costs are going to go up more than $100,000 in a year. So it's a very flat revenue stream.
It's amazing. Has it been flat over the years? Because we know in the last 10 or 15 years we've got a lot more gas stations than we used to have. Seems like more people would be buying gas here instead of Tallahassee, but it hasn't gone up.
You can add 20 more gas stations if you've got the same population. You're just spreading it out across everybody. So going up with growth.
I get 3 times as much gas mileage.
Mm-hmm.
Here it comes with my truck.
I get 45 miles an hour.
All right, the fire MSBU fund, everybody's aware we're in the collective bargaining process. We are budgeting the 2% COLA, but we're holding that back until the resolution or conclusion of whatever happens with that process, as well as the 8% increase in capital health plan rates. Now, the county will, even when the rates go up for the insurance, the county will absorb them just like everybody else for CHP rates. It's the 2% COLA that will be held back pending the conclusion of collective bargaining.
And we budgeted for that last year as well, right? So
correct.
that money will come forward from last year?
Well,
They're spending fund balance on other things, so it's not going to be there.
Okay.
That's the problem. I think we have a workshop.
yes, and that's the next point. based on our current projections, at the end of this fiscal year, that fund will be completely out of cash. And that's why we're having a workshop on July 17th. We're still gathering some data on some different things that affect that, and we'll have a more comprehensive discussion about that on July 17th.
This fund is in exactly the opposite situation as your building fund.
We need some ICE inmates to ride the fire truck.
Need the building inspectors to ride the fire truck.
The wastewater fund, we're going to continue the construction and expansion of the wastewater treatment plant. We've received some information from ESG that once the construction is complete, our operating costs are going to increase about $300,000 a year. That plant's going to go from 8 hours to 16 hours, and so we're going to have some additional chemical, utility, sludge, different things that go with wastewater treatment plant. Those costs are going to increase. We've budgeted for continued compliance monitoring with the wastewater treatment plant.
You're going to offset that with increased billing.
Yes, we're going to offset that somewhat with increased billing. We're still working through those calculations, and a lot of it is going to hinge on this next point, which is when Wakulla Gardens and Magnolia Gardens, that construction is finished and we actually start bringing those additional customers on. So there's still some things for us to work out there. We anticipate that there will be a CPI adjustment in user fees. And we're still working on the impact to the portion of ESG's contract that is funded from the wastewater fund. There may be they need some additional staff to monitor that plant for 16 hours, so we're still working on what that dollar amount impact there is going to be.
But that's included in that $300,000 operating cost increase, right?
It is, but it's not necessarily going to be a one-for-one, because some of that $300,000 the county pays directly like utilities, and some of it is going to go to ESG, so we haven't worked out that exact calculation for what's going to go where. So we'll have that information before July 14th. Riversink Water Fund, also a 2% increase there in ESG operations contract. We are transferring money from the general fund to support the Riversink water operations right now. Let me tell you how much that is. About $60,000 a year right now. That is such a small system out there. There's only so much blood you can get from the turnip in its current situation. However, with the widening of 319, we don't know what the potential impact of that's going to be as far as expansion and growth. We may get to some point where there's not a big gap between Crawfordville and Tallahassee like there is now. But we are trying to set this fund up and the system up for the potential either expansion when that opportunity comes around so we can pick up more customers and more revenue, or possible sale of the system, depend on what that growth does down 319. So this is another fluid process here, just trying to weigh all the options. Riversink Water Fund is not in a very good cash position.
It's boxed in between Talquin and Suffolk. I mean, you got what, 100 customers?
100, I think it was like 115 or something.
And so it's
So last few years, we haven't been supplementing it from the general fund, have we?
We started in the current year.
Okay.
And we're going to have to carry that out into 17, 18 until something drastically changed. We collect about $44,000 a year in revenue from that water system. And expenses in 15, 16 were almost 80, so we're spending twice as much to maintain that as we are collecting.
So you need another $600 a year from every user there in order to avoid pulling it out of the general fund.
I don't think.
that's just not possible.
No.
We do apply a CPI adjustment to those rates each year, but like you said, it's just so small it doesn't really make much of a difference.
It's landlocked too, because Bloxman Cutoff south is Talquin service area, so you can't expand that way. There's not going to be no growth happening north. The only place we can legally expand, I guess at this point, is north of Bloxman Cutoff. which you'd have to get all the way over to, in City of Tallahassee, well, they didn't participate in our service area, but you'd have to spend hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars to even extend a line close enough where there's no growth anyway. So it's really an isolated system. It was free. It was bought the Tropical Storm Alberto grant, you know, after the flooded in River Sink.
Nothing's ever free.
Well, this candy works.
This solid waste fund, we've planned for a 1% increase for Waste Pro. We do anticipate there will be an adjustment to the annual assessment rate. We're going to be coming back and we're going to speak about that a little bit at the MSBU workshop as well. There's going to also possibly be some changes to what ESG is responsible for as it relates to solid waste. So we're still working on what the effect on their contract amount is going to be. We have the continuing monitoring of the Medart landfill and Lower Bridge landfill annual costs, as well as the long-term closure and care costs.
Now, this 1% increase, is that one of those things that theoretically we could absorb, right?
That's the increase for Waste Pro's amount. We're not talking about an increase to the citizens.
Okay. Well, what I'm saying.
So yes, and
because we're already collecting the 196. We only theoretically their contract could go up 1%, and the citizens wouldn't have to pay any more on their bill.
Correct, but at some point you'll hit that. They'll intersect, but if we're going to discuss MSBU adjustments, we're going to try to look at everything holistically. So where if we're going to ask for a change over here, we're going to have to give something over here, and that's what we're working through right now. So there will be some offset if there is any fund that needs revenue increases. So we'll get on that July 17th. Also, this is where your funding for Keep Wakulla County Beautiful, $20,000 a year you provide comes from the solid waste fund. That's all I got. I don't know if you have any constitutional officers that would like to address you or anything, or
Jan?
Anyone? Come on down. What about concealed carry, Michelle?
he wants to just have a heads up in case anybody freaks out when they see the change in the clerk. I don't think
we will be having a discussion on the 22nd of June. They will be here to lay out the place. They will be back on the 24th to install everything in July. The 25th, I'll be able to do family and friends. So if anybody's in here, come get in line.
They gotta be your family?
It can be anybody.
Okay.
I can invite friends. So, I mean, if anybody on the board needs to.
Put my wife down. She definitely wants to get in line as soon as you're open.
And then 26th of July, we're supposed to be up and running. I anticipate the lease will be $10,000 a year, and that we will make. But now with the classes going on every month of 20 people or so plus, I can see where we can make $15,000. There was no expense for the equipment. We got some high-class stuff in there. But the only requirement I'm going to have is the county probably will have to help me put up a wall. They want it included. I put up temporary walls and they won't go with that, but I'll be talking to David or someone down there. Not very much.
It'll pay for itself quickly.
AC working now.
Mm-hmm.
One more, thank you. One more possible way to fix the sheriff's department. In one fell swoop, I brought it up before, if we got rid of that 500 kilowatt hour exemption on the PST, that solves the whole problem. All you're doing is getting rid of the exemption.
I'm not gonna go there, Randy, I'm sorry.
Okay.
That
That fixes
my
it.
idea to start with, I'm not gonna.
Okay, well, it only takes 3. All I'm saying is, that's one way to fix it.
I'm with Mike.
Okay.
I'm not gonna go there either.
So you're a junker on your own.
Well, the realistic thing is, it takes money to fix these things. We can't just pretend that they're gonna go away.
I'm not gonna put it on the taxpayers' back again now. Sorry.
Well, we're already heading out of this hole. I mean, fortunate we're
But I mean, if we
$3 million
keep,
now.
you know, God knows I'm not one for raising taxes. If we keep going the rollback rate, the sheriff's department issue is never gonna go away. we could try to whittle it down for over a few years and not go quite to the rollback rate. That would solve it. That's one way to do it. I was just trying to think of ways that it could be solved. Is there any,
I don't want to solve that, I don't want to solve future problems with
it's
problems.
not a future problem, Jerry, it's a problem right now.
Yeah,
Yeah, but if we have another year or two like we have currently with ice,
That doesn't
Yeah.
solve it.
well, it doesn't solve the shortfall, but it replaces the reserves. So we've got time. We've got time at that. So we can,
That is-
if we get forced to deal with that, we might have to make that decision, but I don't think we need to make that decision as long as we got surplus
That's a
money.
valid point, especially if they have 3 years of revenue in reserve. If we make the assumption that we're not going to have another housing crisis and that the housing revenues are going to go up every year for the next 10 or 15 years, you're right. You could say, we got 3 years in reserves, we're going to take that 3 years and we're going to either raise the millage rate over 3 years or we're not going to go the rollback rate over 3 years, and that would solve it too. So it's not a crisis, but
I'd like for us to consider, like we just talked about, using general funds to supplement the water system. We could do the exact same thing to burn up some of that money and avoid a MSBU increase. Maybe, I don't know what those numbers are going to be, but in theory, maybe we could burn some of that up as well. Instead of going to the rollback rate, let's avoid an MSBU increase. I mean, I don't know. I think that's one of the options that we ought to consider.
that is an option. You're exactly right about that. Now, me personally, I feel that the MSBU should fully fund fire. Now, we may not agree on that.
Well, I
but that's
think all funds should, but just like if it should, then River Sink Water System should fund itself. Boat ramp should fund themselves, but sometimes that it doesn't work.
That's right. That's exactly right. But you're right. Or we could either not raise the MSBU. I don't want to get too far off the path here, but either way, you got to have more money, one way or the other. The rollback rate means you get the same amount of money you had last year, but we all know costs have gone up, and they're absorbing that by burning the reserves down, which we can't do that forever. But because of the demands put on the fire department, it just costs more money than it usually has, I guess. So we can fund that through general fund, which I'd rather not do. But anyway, that's a topic for the workshop, I guess.
Well, yeah, but we also have other issues out there that we have become responsible for. And when we're going to Magnolia and Wakulla Gardens, we're putting in the sewer system. All of a sudden, you're going to have a lot more development in there. Last couple meetings ago, we decided impact fees. You weren't interested in taking that solution. So, we need to have parts. We need to make some connections in there to lower the mileage for the fire department. There's a lot of things we need to spend money on in that, because we've become basically the developer there. And now we have a little extra money. Maybe we should be spending some of that money on that now when the property's cheap, before we pave the roads and the property gets expensive.
And I brought up before about having some sort of stormwater assessment in these areas to help pay for property acquisition, for ponds, for taxpayers. I get too far off subject, but taxpayers got to pay for a new driveway culvert in every lot in Wakulla Gardens that somebody lives on. And, my dad in Smith Creek shouldn't have to pay for that culvert. He didn't. But if we could have some sort of stormwater assessment, even if it was small, and we had it for many years to help offset the costs that are directly benefiting that area, they're not paying anything for it.
Offset the cost in that area. We've got to get parks in there, otherwise once it gets developed, the only place to play will be in the streets.
We inherited the problem.
We've got to start thinking now to solve the problem before it gets expensive.
Randy, what are you looking to get out of this? Anything, any sort of general direction about go to the rollback rate, don't go to the rollback rate?
If you have some general direction, I'll be glad to have it, but you gave me the direction on the Veterans Association, so.
I think we're all inclined to go to the rollback rate is what I'm hearing.
Well, you could also argue for a reduction in the PST. We lowered the millage rate last time, and that 35% of the properties in the county are not owned by people in the county. So, but everybody that pays the PST is, so you're giving a direct benefit to more citizens of the county if you lower PST as opposed to cutting property taxes.
And my suggestion was actually to raise a little bit, so I think we're a little far apart on that. I'd rather see more PST and less property taxes, but
Me too.
that's why there's 5.
Yep.
So we're generally rollback rate, is that what we're hearing?
I think so, but I would like to see if we could use it to avoid an increase in the solid waste and an increase in the fire MSBU if possible. I understand.
And I'd like to see
Yeah.
some investment into our future and develop some of the infrastructure we need in the future, because I don't want to be counting on grant funds forever. There's a lot of infrastructure we need to be funding with this money that we have right now.
As we know, we're going to get asked this. Anything other than a rollback rate is a tax increase.
Yes.
That's just the reality. Anything other than the rollback rate's a tax increase. But things cost more money. That's why people get a raise to help pay for increased expenses.
Give it
It's a
to them in this hand and take it from this hand is what you're saying.
No, I mean,
Well, it's not a
things
tax
cost
increase
more than they did in the
individual.
30s.
It's not a tax increase on the individual, it's a tax increase on the county, but not on the individual.
Well,
Well, they still pay more.
if
They
your
write a bigger
house,
check.
if your house goes up in value,
If your house
okay,
goes up and back, but a lot of the rollback rates coming from all the new development,
correct.
okay, that's coming online, and those people are not, they're...
In
part of
general,
it.
you're right, in general, will my personal property taxes go up if we don't go the rollback rate? Probably not. Because your assessment actually, if you're a homestead house, you actually get depreciated a little bit every year.
Right.
So your property taxes will probably go lower. And Chuck's exactly right. The increase in revenue is due to new growth.
And we're still having new
But
growth. We have
if you look at all the taxes, people are going to still say, if you don't go the rollback rates, you've raised taxes, which technically they're correct.
We should probably get Brad to come up here and talk about that 3% cap too, and tell us where we're going to be at with that.
There's a lot of confusion going on right now. What y'all are saying. On homestead properties, we do have, it is set, it's been set since 1995, that your assessed value cannot go up more than 3% of the CPI. For the last 10 years, that increase has been less than 1%. This year, it's at 2.1%. So anybody, if there's no increase in their value, in their assessed value, if it stayed the same, they're going to see, if they had a cap in there, they're going to see a 2.1% increase. So if we left values the same, millage the same, they're still going to see a 2.1% increase. So going back to that rollback rate.
Finally caught up with that 3%?
Well, no, it's 3% or that CPI, or the CPI, or the change in the CPI is what that increase is. It's because every year, and what that basically means is, as market value goes up, it can go up 1,000%. But your assessed value, which is where your taxes or your exemptions come off of to build your taxable value, it can't go up more than that 3%. So over the years, as values went up, they may have went up $1,000 or 1,000%, but you couldn't go up more than 3% of CPI each year. And so you end up with this gap, which is that Saver Homes differential, that you have a difference between the assessed value and the market value. And with that, every year, even though over the last several years that we had market values decreasing, you still had this assessed value going up whatever percent the change in the CPI was, which is last year was 0.05. This year it's going to be 2.1. So it's going to take, everybody's going to see that has that homestead cap, it's going to see a 2.1% increase if nothing was to go up in value either way. So when you start looking at that and looking at the rollback rate, I mean, the rollback rate, if we don't go to rollback rate, they're definitely going to see more than 2.1% on all those homestead properties that have that. If you kind of tentatively set this at the rollback rate now, we're still working on a roll, and we're still seeing increase. So this rollback rate is actually going to change, and it's
Rollback rate, Brad, I'm sorry, include that 2.1% increase?
no. When the rollback rate is based off the adjusted. It's based off the adjusted value, so it doesn't include any new construction from last year. It's based solely off what we had in new construction from 15, not from 16, but from 15, and any increases in sales value for that. So you end up all the new construction that was built last year before January 1. You're going to get that value and taxes above that, but that rollback is strictly set off of what that prior was minus deletions, anything that came off the roll, and minus any increase in new construction.
Very complicated, in other words.
Yes.
So sounds like a good year to go to the rollback rate.
Yeah, I would recommend if you can this year, do that because it is a big, we're at what, I think
4.86.
Yeah, 4.86% increase in value this year. And it's some the commercial stuff we're still working on, and it's got an increase that's coming too. So it's going to be more than that. It's going to be probably over 5.
How does that value compare to statewide average right now?
You're talking about the percentage change?
Yeah.
We're still about a year behind what most everybody else is, a year and a half behind what you see. So, I mean, and that's generally how it is. The other markets move faster than we do.
Maybe this will be a good year for the rollback rate. Sounds to me like the rollback rate next year will be a lot, well, not huge, but, you know, it'll be a pretty substantial amount next year.
Right.
Based on what's coming on the tax rolls, that may
That's
be a
correct.
better time to try to address.
Well, you're looking at, I think last year we had right at 100 houses, new houses. This year I think we've got close to 200 that have already been, over 200 that have been permitted. So you're going to get a big increase next year
Plus commercial.
from that, plus all the commercial that we have, because anything that was not finished before January 1 of this year is not going to come online until next year.
Gotcha.
All right.
Good problem to have.
Yeah.
Good.
Any other constitutionals? Jan, got anything you want to say?
Cheryl?
Good. Good.
Yeah.
Well, we got about 5 minutes. Any citizens want to say anything?
Bathroom before you do.
If not, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right, we'll adjourn and BOCC meeting at 5 p.m.
Trying to get it, so I can say